Hi, Kanji. Thanks for coming on and talking with me today.
Hey, Jake. Good morning. Great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
So I came across your work with your memoir, Appalachian Zen. You've done various things and various things within Zen. For those who aren't familiar, could you let just people briefly just know a little bit about your background and the work that you do now?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So basically, I'm living in Western Massachusetts, and my background is that, um, as you alluded to just now in terms of the memoir, I was raised in Central Appalachia in Pennsylvania, in a rural area, and mostly mountains, farmlands, small, uh, working class. Industrial villages, things like that. And I left in my early adulthood and uh, went to Penn State University, majored in religious studies, and then I took a lot of years of working different jobs in order to support my writing. I was primarily doing poetry, but also working in fiction and creative nonfiction, and eventually returned to school, finished my master's degree at Harvard in Buddhist studies, Master of Divinity. And right now, what I'm doing is providing spiritual guidance and working in Zen ministry for people who are seeking that kind of guidance. And the book that you mentioned, Appalachian Zen, Seeking True Home, and a Journey Through the American Heartland and the Buddha Dharma, came out last year. And it was awarded the Best Spiritual Memoir by the Nautilus Book Awards, which I was really grateful for, very surprised. And and people seem to be responding to it because it really is a book that addresses class in America, but also addresses finding the true home, which is really inside each of us.
Yeah, I like that true home concept, and that's something that I was hoping to touch on. Could you I guess outline what you mean by true home?
Yeah, so part of the framework of the book is coming to terms with my birth home, which was highly conflicted because I was growing up as a teenager in the late 60s and early 70s during the cultural ferment that still is continuing today, and felt very alienated as a teenager because I was very much part of the counterculture, and it was a very conservative area to be living in. So there was a tension around my birth area, my birth home. And so a lot of the book begins with investigating what it is to try to find reconciliation and forgiveness around the birth home, the place that we consider our place of origin. And then going through progression to finally realize that what Zen Buddhism calls the true home is within us, and it's always present, it's always available, so that whatever we encounter in life and wherever we go in life, we're always home. And it gives us that kind of equanimity and stability that otherwise we might lack.
So it's more of an internal home rather than being dependent on having a home that's tied to a certain kind of environment or surroundings.
Exactly. And one doesn't preclude the other. So finding the true
Sure.
home, which is internal, can also enhance our ability to appreciate the external
Mm.
home. And those roots are very important, to have those kinds of ancestral roots and to honor those is really important, or to have a natal birthplace landscape that really is evocative for you and really speaks to you is important. And I feel blessed to have both of those, but it was a real difficult process coming to terms psychologically, and I know this is your field of interest, psychologically healing the wounds of the place where I was born, and coming to realize that there were also things to be grateful for. I was very fortunate because I was raised within an extremely loving family. I had wonderful parents, but as I said, when I was a teenager, the environment around me was quite hostile and quite violent, and I was subjected to that. And I didn't realize until a year or two after I graduated from high school that actually I was afflicted with what today we would call post-traumatic stress syndrome. So dealing with all of that, and at the same time realizing that the virtues of those struggles were that they made me stronger and they made me fearless. So loving the beauty of that pastoral landscape of central Pennsylvania where I grew up, and also realizing that the adversities were actually virtues in many ways, in retrospect, even though at the time it was hard to see that.
So growing up in that area, how did you come across Zen, and why do you think that tradition resonated with you?
That's a great question. I came across Zen and Buddhism in general as a teenager, partly because it was in the cultural zeitgeist. It was part of the counterculture that
Yeah.
I was familiar with as a teenager. People were exploring all kinds of different spiritual paths, and I had been raised nominally as a Christian, which meant a lot to me and still does, but we were not regular churchgoers. And so I was ripe for exploration. And again, when I was a teenager, a lot of people were looking into Asian spiritual traditions. The Beatles had gone to India at the invitation of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to meditate, and that was widely publicized and had a huge influence on young people. And and then there was also the Beat movement. Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, Jack Kerouac, and those people were investigating Buddhism. So I sort of gravitated naturally toward it. And it was mostly a matter of reading about it. And at the same time, I was already temperamentally attuned to some of the basic practices, even though I wasn't aware of them as such. So walking through the woods and just being completely present with the trees and the sun and the wind, or walking along the creek and just being completely present with the sound of the water without a thought in my head, came very naturally to me. There were also some influences that were cultural because it was the time of the Vietnam War. So the United States was engaged in a very bloody and brutal war with a predominantly Buddhist country. And so being very aware of that prompted a lot of us to look more deeply into what that Vietnamese culture was. And one of the first images of Buddhism, I mentioned this in the book, that I ever saw when I was younger as a child was a Buddhist monk self-immolating and going up in flames in Saigon as a protest against the Diem regime, which just terrified me and haunted me, and it was so bizarre. So I had that initial impression that required some uh, overcoming of resistance to what seemed a kind of exotic and strange foreign religion. But again, temperamentally, I felt very much at home once I began to explore more deeply. And then there were several decades of setting explicit spiritual exploration aside and devoting myself completely to art as a salvific path, as a path of awakening, which eventually I found to be necessary but not sufficient. It just wasn't enough anymore. And there were a number of personal challenges and struggles at that point in my life when I was in my late 30s, approaching 40, that prompted me to look again to some kind of deeper, more explicitly spiritual path. And here where I live in Western Massachusetts, there are a lot of Buddhist practitioners. A lot of my friends are Buddhist practitioners. So again, it was easy and natural for me to gravitate toward that.
So, was there a distinct, what was it, uh, a longer phase, or was there more of a distinct tipping point where you said that, or thought that, that these kinds of ideas and practices are something that I should go back to when you were in your 30s? Like, what led to that transition when you decided that um, it was something that you wanted to go into more deliberately again?
Yeah, another great question. What happened basically, the initial catalyst was I was in a relationship with a woman I loved very much, and it broke up unexpectedly, and I was really devastated. And I was really looking for some kind of solace and some kind of understanding. And when I began to read some books about Buddhism uh, that had been recommended to me by some of my Buddhist friends, they immediately resonated because Buddhism is explicitly formed around the proposition that a life centered on self-centered desire is a life of suffering. And it focuses also on impermanence. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was struggling with. So that resonated. And then about a year later, I walked into a Zendo for the first time, and that immediate, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of true home, I immediately felt I was home. That external environment resonated with my internal sense of home in a way that was quite powerful. And that feeling of homecoming has never left me. Every time I step into a Zen temple or a Zendo, I immediately feel that I'm at home. So those were the tipping points. And, I've been practicing ever since and feeling really grateful for the practice.
Yeah, it seems like with something like Zen and Taoism, which is it's very similar to it seems like those traditions or ways of living are something that it doesn't seem like it's often a process of converting somebody into that way of living. It's more of somebody finds it and it just seems to fit like a glove.
Mm.
Was that your experience where you just kind of you stepped into it and you're like, yeah, this is the one that really resonates with me already. I just happen to now find the tradition that's kind of articulating the things that I was already feeling or inclined towards.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that that describes it well. It did fit like a glove. And having said that, um, I'm by no means a Zen chauvinist. I don't think that Zen Buddhism is superior
Sure.
or
Sure.
uniquely the path that others should choose. I still have a tremendous respect for having studied them as a religious studies scholar, but also as somebody who values the mystical tradition at the source of all religions, have a great respect for, the authentic practices of Christianity and Hinduism and Islam and as well as Buddhism, as well as Judaism, and also other esoteric traditions. So I feel great affinity for other spiritual traditions, especially at the source. Not so much the institutionalized religious pietistic structures, but the actual sacred experience of of direct contact with divinity, with the miracle of life in the universe. So, as you said earlier, when I first encountered Zen Buddhism, having great respect for all these other traditions, it was Zen specifically that did feel like it fit me like a glove. Now, what you also said was interesting too. You're absolutely right. Relatively speaking, Buddhism in general is not a proselytizing religion, and yet at the same time, historically, it does have a strong missionary tradition. Right, right at the very beginning, just a few centuries after the death of the historical Buddha, there were monks going in every direction to really spread the teachings. So there is that tradition, but generally it's not a tradition, as you said quite accurately, that seeks converts. It's a tradition generally that people come to, and if it feels appropriate for them, if it feels that it resonates, then it's something they're invited to explore.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said about institutionalization of various traditions. How do you feel about the institutionalization and structure of Zen? What are some of the what's some of the value of that, and what are some of the dangers in terms of um, how it handles the, I guess, the essence of the tradition?
hmm that's a terrific question as well. So the the essence, I think, of Zen practice as I distill it, and what I tell my students is be clear, be kind, be present. That's all there is to it. It's so simple. And being clear simply means being clear about the nature of reality, not being deluded about the nature of reality. And the primary teaching means for that is what in Zen tradition is called the Koan literature. And koans, as some people may know, some of your listeners might know, because it has become somewhat mainstreamed in popular culture. They are short anecdotes or sort of riddle-like stories that immediately plunge a person into a state of not knowing. And then with time, through sitting with the koan, there's a possibility for penetrating to a very highly pronounced experience of the truth of the nature of reality. So there's that, being clear. Being kind is simply not being self-centered. And the primary means for teaching that is in the Zen ethical precepts, which are guidelines for behaving in ways in the world that are compassionate and skillful and wise. And then being present is simply being free of distraction. And the primary means for teaching that in the Zen tradition is Zazen or Zen meditation. So those three very simple, very accessible concepts and practices, I think, are the authentic core of the tradition. The rest of it, as beautiful as it is and as compelling as it is, increasingly I find to really be superfluous. And I think that arguably is true in all major religious traditions. There's a core spiritual practice, and then there's an immense edifice that's been constructed over time that has its own particular value in terms of what it can provide people in terms of community and sanctuary and a sense of belonging, and also again that the aesthetics of an enormous cathedral, or as I
Right.
said earlier, of a zendo. But they also tend to be encrusted with hierarchy and religious authority and entrenched dogma and pietism. And I think all of that can actually be quite detrimental. So stripping all of that away to get down to the core essence, I think, is really important. And within Zen tradition, to get back to the thrust of your question, historically, the tradition has grown up in China, in the Chan tradition, and in Japan around the monasteries, the monastic tradition, and the lineage tradition transmitted from teacher to student. And I have respect for that. I think it's profound in a lot of ways and really lovely, and it really informed my practice early. But in all candor, there have been also, and I think this is mainstream now to be public knowledge, there have been a lot of sexual scandals, a lot of abuses of power, not only within Asian and American Buddhism, but within other religious traditions as well.
Right.
But speaking exclusively to Buddhism, it's been it's been really traumatic, and it's done a lot of damage to a lot of people. And so I think it's time now in American Buddhism to really look rigorously and re-examine a lot of our fundamental premises and to see what really is necessary and important and what we can dispense with. And I'm doing a lot of questioning. I have a lot of questioning about the power dynamics of some of the institutional traditions that have been passed on to us.
What was your experience like in Japan in dealing with in training as a student and being immersed in those traditions?
Mm. It was revelatory. It was so exciting. Now, I wasn't there that long. I was there for about 3 months, but so much was packed into each minute of those 3 months. And the Appalachian Zen book recounts this in some detail. I was privileged to be able to attend a small Zen training center in the northern Japanese town of Kanagasaki. And very small. There was one Roshi, one teacher there, named Watanabe. He spoke no English whatsoever, and there was one monk who I rarely saw. And I would go there several times a week. We went through a ritual of ringing the outdoor temple bell, and then I would go inside the temple and we would sit in Zen meditation, and then have a formal what's called oryoki meal, which was the breakfast. And I learned so much from his presence. Even though he spoke no English, traditionally it's said that a student learns so much simply from observing the teacher, listening to the teacher, being in the teacher's presence. And he had such a sense of imperturbable good humor simply in being alive. And he would just chuckle and be delighted that that we were moving through the day. And because I was the first foreigner, not only the first American, but the first foreigner from any country ever to have sat in Zen meditation at that particular northern Japanese Zen temple in its 400-year history. He was also quite taken with the historical significance of that, and which surprised me and touched me deeply. And so he also had kind of an avuncular tone of, being sort of an older uncle who was giving me instruction and looking out for me in a very caring, gentle way. And so even though there weren't explicit scriptural teachings or anything like that, he was a very important teacher for me in all that he communicated and everything that he did.
Yeah, I've heard that about spiritual teachers in various traditions that it seems like often the more powerful lessons are thought to be just being around somebody who's an embodiment of the way of being or the spirit or the philosophy rather than them laying down like this is how you have to do this is how you have to do that. It's kind of just figuring it out on your own, and being in the presence of somebody who's doing that well seems to carry most of the freight.
I think that's well said. Absolutely. Hmm.
When you first started Zen meditation, what was your experience like, and how did that evolve over time through your practice?
Well, excuse me, when I first started Zen meditation, I was, as I said, in a certain sense, I'd been doing it much of my life without realizing I'd been doing it, because, again, temperamentally, I had kind of a sensibility that was structured for it. Um, there were times when I would just stand by the window for, I don't know, 45 minutes and just watch the sunset and not be thinking anything, just be purely present. So by the time I was formally, officially doing Zen meditation quite a few years later, my initial experience was coming to it quite naturally. But there were also challenges in doing extended Zen meditation sessions. There are Zen retreats that go sometimes for 7, 8, 9 days, constant, nonstop meditation. They're called sesshins. And you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you're sitting on the Zen meditation cushion, you're sitting all day long. Now, there are breaks for work practice, but they're also conducted in a state of meditative, concentrated awareness. And there's no eye contact with anybody. There's total silence throughout those 7, 8, or 9 days. And it's very rigorous, but it's also it's a long-standing tradition that's designed to help you to break through your resistances. And once you get through that, there's a real sense, excuse me, of being broken open into a new space of wholeness and joy. But doing that for the first time was very challenging. Coming up against those resistances of not wanting to do this, not wanting to be here. It's really too hard. My legs really hurt. I feel like I'm being crippled for life. I'm never going to walk again. Ring the bell, for God's sake. Get us out of here.
The
And
knees.
yeah, the knees,
The
exactly.
knees.
The knees.
It's so tough.
And you just have to surrender to it. You just have to
Yeah.
surrender to it and give up, or else you won't get through it. And that happened about halfway through the first session that I ever did. But it was really hard up until that point, trying to figure out all kinds of coping mechanisms. Maybe if I just stuff a little more padding into my pants, my knees won't hurt as much. Or when they're on the floor, it's trying to figure out workarounds. And it's really just the mind. It's just the mind with its own innate craziness. But it also has its own innate wisdom. So getting down to that innate wisdom and just surrendering to get to that place. And so it was an extraordinary experience, but that was hard. It was hard, and it's meant to be.
So for you, was that kind of just a process of sticking it out through all of the noise until eventually it just kind of like the volume is just turned way down, and that's really where the power comes in, and it's just you just gotta suffer through it for a little bit until you get most of that out of the way.
Yeah, turning down the volume, exactly. Getting to that silent, still place. And it is powerful when you're doing it with other people because there's a synergy and you really feel that other
Yeah.
people are trying to do that as well. So even though it's completely silent with no eye contact, there is a sense of mutual support. Getting past all of that noise in the head, all that monkey mind chatter, and getting down into that still place. And the koan work is like that too. Uh, one of the koans that a lot of people have heard, because again, it's kind of infiltrated popular culture, is what is the sound of one hand clapping?
Yeah.
And it's not a completely accurate translation. It's more to have complete fidelity to the original. It's more like, the sound of two hands clapping. What is the sound of one hand? But in any case, and there are hundreds of these, but in any case, sitting with a koan is similar to what you just described, getting past the initial noise down into the silence and the stillness where you can really begin to penetrate. And for me, the analogy that I've often used in my own experience is it's like dropping down through the floor levels of an elevator shaft. So being with the koan, there's that initial experience of being totally nonplussed and your mind just goes totally blank. Well, this sounds like nonsense. I have no idea what to do with this.
Yeah.
And then you sort of penetrate to this level and you think, oh, now I get it. Now I see it. But then you keep sitting and that drops away to another level. And it's, oh, now I see. And it keeps dropping down until finally you get to the lowest level. And then you can present it.
And
Excuse me.
you're giving an answer to the koan to a teacher, and they're affirming that the answer that you gave indicates that you've hit that level of understanding or awareness.
Exactly, exactly. But the crucial thing is in doing that, not to present some kind of intellectual exposition
Right.
or some kind of explanation. You have to present it in a way that it can be verbal. There can be some verbal expression as long as it's not coming from the discursive intellect and saying, well, I think what it means is blah, 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 blah. But primarily, it's often more like a pantomime that is physically expressing spontaneously in the moment your vital realization, completely alive of what the koan is presenting.
It does that answer is it supposed to be specific to or even relevant to the koan, or is it just like the koan's just trying to get you to that place, and then you can kind of like if that makes any sense, like the is the answer supposed to be like is it supposed to make sense relative to the koan, or is the koan just trying to break you out of this, and then any answer that you give that indicates that level of awareness works?
It's sort of a mixture of both, but primarily the focus is on the former. So
Okay.
it should be relevant to the koan. It should have some um, immediacy with reference to the koan, but it's also doing what you described secondarily. It's also getting you out of that place where you're stuck in the intellectual analysis and you're giving an answer that's reflective of your awareness in that moment, but yes, you're right, relative to what the koan is explicitly presenting.
How do you use those in your teachings with students that you have and people that you're trying to help? What's that process like?
Well, there's a standard literature. These koans over centuries have been compiled into specific collections. So one is called The Gateless Barrier, sometimes translated as The Gateless Gate. There's one called The Blue Cliff Record. There's one called The Book of Serenity, which is sometimes translated as Book of Equanimity. And they're sequential. So I start people off the same way that I was trained, starting off with a series of introductory koans, and they're quite pithy, quite simple, but they start to get the student acclimated toward this new way of being in the world, which is not to say that there's anything remotely wrong with intellectual analysis. It's quite important to know how to do that and to be able to do that well. That's why we go to schools, is try to train our mind to be knowledgeable and to be supple and sharp and clear. So that's fantastic. That's important. But there's also another way of being that our culture doesn't really train us to do, and
Right.
that is to temporarily be able to put that aside and just to be purely present, purely aware with what's happening right here, right now. And so the introductory koans serve to help to acclimate students to this new way of being, a new way of processing the living moment until they want to go back to the cerebral process again. And then, proceeding from the introductory koans, we start with the first collection of the Gateless Gate or the Gateless Barrier and proceed one by one through those. And so the process is that we'll sit together in silent meditation for a little bit, and then the student will present the koan. And traditionally, what would happen in, for example, a medieval Japanese Zen center would be the student would go in for a formal meeting with the teacher, which is called dokusan, and the teacher would simply abruptly ring the bell and ring the student out of the room if the teacher wasn't satisfied with the presentation. I don't think that works with Americans. I think that's too harsh. I think American students appreciate having more nurturing, having more patience.
Yeah.
So that's what I do, and I sort of help to walk them through it a bit. I don't take away the responsibility for them to work hard and to do the training and to reach a place of their own insight and awareness. But I do give them support. And once I'm satisfied that they've clearly seen what the koan is presenting to them and that they've presented it in turn to me, then I suggest to them to move on to the next one.
With Zen becoming more and more popular and more people being able to read from various books about these kinds of practices and koan training and things of that nature, is does it become more challenging to, or do some of the koans and the answers have to change so that like people don't just kind of come in like thinking that they know what they're already supposed to say? Like, is that an issue that you run into?
That's a great question. I don't run into that issue so much. It's interesting historically that at one point in Zen Buddhist history, they actually had manuals circulating surreptitiously among the monks that had, quote, the answers to the koans. It's sort of like those dream manuals that tell you what your dreams mean. It's just
Yeah,
ridiculous. It's just
yeah,
absurd. But because each person's dream obviously is unique to that person, that's your unconscious communicating with you in a very special, particular way. Well, each person's answer to the koan, it's not unique in the same way. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold,
no
but
problem.
there will be some overlap traditionally in the answers to the koans, but each person is bringing to it a unique personality, unique sensibility in presenting it. So I'm not finding so much that uh, with the books being generally available, you can order them through Amazon and so on, that people are are coming to them without the requisite freshness of encountering them for the first time, and already having standard answers prepared. I'm not finding that so much. But one thing that maybe is pertinent to that general theme is we have in Zen what's called a Genjo koan, which is the koan of your daily life, and that's different for everybody as well too. I mean, the koan of your daily life might mean, how do I make my marriage function in a healthier way? I just got a cancer diagnosis. How do I work with that? How do I work, on relationship with my kids? How do I work on my career? These are parts of our daily life. These are our Genjo koans. And so I really encourage people to bring their personal experience, their Genjo koan, to the traditional koan. It's really about how is this alive for you, so that it's not just something standard and by rote. It's how does this really enliven you, and where does this really speak to you? Otherwise, what's the point?
Right. With with meditation, it seems like often the focus is on seated meditation, and there seems to be a certain way that is often taught to sit, a certain kind of posture, a certain approach. What's your approach like to meditation? Do you have a daily practice like that? Do you prefer that kind of method? Do you like to do other things as well? Like you mentioned that like even when you were younger, maybe going on walks, looking out the window, things like that. Like there's various ways to get into that kind of space. What do you find seems to work best for you?
Mm. Yeah, what works best for me is the I think which is very, very close to the traditional training, which is sitting in a zazen posture on the meditation cushion. This is what I teach students, and to really be with the breath, to have the breath be the foundation, and then to sit daily in that seat, what it was in fact a seated yogic position, which is quite a powerful experience. And then whatever's arising, whatever thoughts or sensations arise, simply note them and let them go and return to the breath. So that's the fundamental practice. And I think that's foundational. But it's also true, I think, that there are other ways to complement that basic practice. And those do include things like, walking in the woods, putting your phone away, walking in the woods, being completely with the experience. Things, can be as simple as, being totally present when you're washing the dishes, or something as basic. There are other forms of yoga to do. There are, ways to dance to sacred music where you're completely present. You're not daydreaming. You're not thinking about what's for dinner. You're just totally doing this. So there are all kinds of ways to facilitate this experience of, as we were saying earlier, calming that otherwise incessant mental chatter, getting to the still place of complete presence in the moment. And at the same time, I think the sitting practice of zazen on the cushion is foundational. Now, the other thing to say about that too is that there's a strong emphasis, especially in socially engaged Buddhism, of taking the practice off the cushion into the street, off the cushion into whatever you might be engaging. And that's equally important. If all we were doing was just sitting on a cushion, it doesn't really directly benefit the world. I think indirectly it benefits the world. I think there's an energy that ripples out from that that's quite healing, and we need that. But also it's important to take the practice off the cushion and encounter whatever's arising with that same internal space of equanimity and wisdom and compassion, and that's part of how we heal the world.
Yeah, that kind of ties into with something that you mentioned earlier in balancing both the intellect and intuition, and that being able to do both at the same time without blunting one or the other. With you going to Harvard and studying religion there, what's your relationship like with more of a non-intellectual approach and kind of a more intuitive feeling with something like Zen, compared to more scholarly academic work,
Mm,
like what you were doing at Harvard.
yeah. I think there's a dynamic tension between the two, and I think they do complement each other. But the dynamic tension, at least in my experience, certainly is there. And when when I was at Harvard, I learned a lot academically, and I was grateful for it, and I still am. At the same time, I was co-facilitating the Harvard Buddhist community, so we did have an active, small but active sitting sangha group doing meditation once or twice a week, and then I had my own daily practice at home. So navigating that was interesting. Finding a way to be in that, that intuitive space of realization as well as the pure awareness space of realization, and, balancing that with extremely intense intellectual endeavor and academic study because it was really rigorous. Um, but at the same time, there's a tradition for that in Japanese Zen too. The traditional monasteries, they did have libraries, and there was intellectual study, even though the focus was on what was happening in the Zendo, in the meditation hall, and the koan work, and so on. So to bring all that together, I think is a real healthy path toward wholeness. And as we were saying earlier, it's really important to have a well-trained, well-functioning intellect, and to be able to bring that to bear in any particular academic discussion. And again, that's why we train in school. But there's this other mode of being that's equally important. So when I was in the colloquium for Buddhist ministry at Harvard, there was the emphasis on the practical training, the field work, all of that, as well as the scholarship. And as hard as it was, I mean, I did find it exhilarating.
What are your thoughts on incorporating multiple traditions together? Like, do you have certain elements from some of the traditions that you studied or just have studied on your own time that you kind of like to bring into your practices today and even maybe your teachings today?
Well, I think that's a really live question for a lot of people in, our 21st century American society, especially among, spiritual seekers who are disenchanted, and I think rightly so, with some of those institutional religious authorities, authoritarian structures we were talking about earlier. And so, I think the answer to that question is twofold. One is I do think, from my personal experience, that it's important to make a commitment to one tradition, to really invest yourself in it, to maintain that dedication, to be devoted to it, because it gives you a depth and a grounding that you're not going to get otherwise. If you're just a spiritual dilettante who's hopping around from tradition to tradition, it's always going to be shallow. Plus, you'll never have the opportunity to challenge yourself the way that you can if you make a commitment to one particular tradition. Because if you're just sort of spiritually window shopping, what you'll probably end up doing is picking this and picking this and picking this. It's like, oh, I like this. Oh, I like this. Oh, I like this. And you're just staying in your own familiar comfort zone. It's just everything that's pretty to you, it's attractive to you, you feel really cozy in it, and you're not going to get pushed.
Right.
And so I do think it's important to make a commitment. Having said that, I do also think it's important, again, from personal experience, to acknowledge the worth of other authentic mystical traditions that do provide direct experience of the sacred. And it can be healthy after you've made your commitment to whatever that tradition's going to be, to vitalize it with a broader perspective coming from these other traditions. So in my own case, I do fairly frequently refer, for example, to the Gospel of Thomas and the esoteric Christian tradition. And for some of your listeners who might not be familiar, that's a series of statements attributed to Jesus. There's no narrative in it, like in the four canonical Gospels. It's just a series of statements, and it's one of the earlier extant texts of statements attributed to Jesus. So I call them Jesus koans because they're quite challenging and they're really paradoxical, and they take you into places that you don't expect, and they challenge you often quite a lot. So I'll refer to those, and I do feel a deep, love and affinity for Jesus in the Christian tradition as a great bodhisattva, as we would say in Buddhism. And again, for some of your listeners who might not be familiar, in the Buddhist Mahayana tradition, there are three main vehicles of Buddhism. One is called Mahayana. We don't have to go into all the details necessarily, but a bodhisattva is somebody who has pledged and dedicated his or her or their life to freeing all beings from suffering. To me, that perfectly describes Jesus
Right.
of Nazareth, a bodhisattva, committed to freeing all beings from suffering. So I will invoke some references to mystical Christianity. My own practice, though, is infused, I think, with the sense of the the reverence for the natural world that I get from, you mentioned Taoism earlier, certainly in Taoism, Native American traditions without wanting to appropriate those in any way, but to allow them to give me, a deeper appreciation for the numinous quality and the pervasive spirit of in everything throughout the natural world. Um, and there's something from every tradition that I think can be a benefit in any particular way. Judaism has such a deep sense of community and covenant, which is beautiful. And so much of Buddhist tradition originates from Brahmanic Hinduism, and there's a lot there too about the process of liberation, experiencing what they call moksha. The mystical Sufi tradition in Islam is beautiful. I've done some very deep reading in Rumi and working there. So bringing all of that together into the one tradition that I've made a commitment to, I think really invigorates that tradition and invigorates my practice.
So you want to start with going deep into something rather than staying surface level, and then from there you can kind of branch out and use things to help aid that, I guess, tradition or practice that you've already kind of committed to and gone deeper in, rather than like bouncing around too many of them first without really getting past the beginner levels on any one of them.
Yeah, I think so. I think at the very beginning it can be fruitful to do some exploring before you make your commitment. You want to
Right.
check things out for sure.
Yeah.
But it might be similar to metaphorically, it might be like pick a boat, pick a boat that you can go out into the water in with confidence and commitment. But once you're in that boat, feel free to explore different islands.
Yeah.
Get out of the boat and explore the islands, and then get
Yeah.
back in your boat.
The Throughout your life and in studying and practicing and teaching Zen, how has that influenced your relationship with art?
Oh, this is such a, oh man, talk about Genjo koans. This is my Genjo koan. This is one of mine. Um, how to reconcile Zen practice with art. Now, traditionally in most Asian societies, including the Chan tradition in China and the Zen tradition in Japan, there's no need to reconcile. They're perfectly integrated. But I come out, as so many of us do, I come out of a Western romantic, capital R, romantic artistic tradition, starting in the early 19th century. Well, actually, you can probably trace it back to the Renaissance, the artist as hero. Um, but so this is something I'm really aware of and work through all the time. My writing comes out of a place of self-expression, which is the Western Romantic artistic tradition. You're expressing yourself. We've all heard that. We all know that. It's basically almost a cliche. So expressing the self. But Zen practice is about realizing what we call no self. And no self is simply what you and I have already been talking about in our conversation today. It's that pure awareness, pure presence in which that small chattering ego self can subside for a little while, and we're just completely here and now. That's the experience of no self. But how to balance the Western romantic artistic tradition of self-expression with the Zen experience of no self. That's an ongoing conundrum for me. All, as I was saying a moment ago, all of my writing is really self-expression, and for me, to be an artist, to be a writer, is to take risks in doing that, to be vulnerable, to expose myself on the page as candidly as I think I can, even if it at times doesn't make me look good. That's the risk you have to take
Yeah.
in expressing yourself, to be totally honest. Um, And then, of course, to develop the craft sufficiently so that you're doing it as lyrically as you can and engagingly as you can. So it's not just narcissistic. You know, you want to find that universal level that other people can relate to and respond by saying, well, this speaks to me because there's sufficient depth to engage similar things that I've experienced as well. So to reach that level of self-expression, and again in a way that's not just self-indulgent, but that has an ulterior artistic purpose. That's what my writing is about. But then there's this whole other practice of no self. And so, and you know, to be completely honest about it, to be a writer is to be very egotistical. Again, you don't want to be narcissistic, but to think that other people, you know, are going to give up precious hours of their life
Right.
to read, you know, what you write. I
Yeah.
mean, my God, the egotism of that, and you know, even if it's not explicitly autobiographical, ultimately it really is about you,
Yeah.
whatever it is you're writing. So a tremendous amount of ego. But then the Zen practice is about starting to, allow that ego to dissolve and get to a place of more openness, open-heartedness, and more humility. So to balance this colossal egotism that's required of any writer with an authentic spiritual humility, that's a really interesting process and one
Yeah.
that I'm always trying to work through. And when I was doing poetry, which I don't really do much anymore, I'm more committed to prose, but when I was doing poetry, I was aware that the white space on the page that surrounds and encompasses the words of the poem, that white space, that silence of the white space, is really the space of no self. And then emerging from
That's
that white
interesting.
space on the page is the self expression of whatever the words are trying to convey. So that was one way I could work with it in poetry, but in prose, it's another problem altogether. But I think it's fascinating, and I don't know if I'll ever reach a place of fully integrating and accommodating. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Do you have any work coming up that you'd like to let people know about?
Well, the work coming up, thanks for asking. The work coming up is a book that I actually have finished writing. I've been working on it for the
Oh,
last
cool.
6 years. Yeah. And very, very quickly, the book is called The Whole Earth is Medicine. And the subtitle is Science, Zen, and Science, Zen, and Mind-Body Connection in a Journey through Cancer, and a journey of healing through cancer. And what it addresses is my personal experience of being diagnosed almost 8 years ago now with an intermediate level stage 2 prostate cancer and deciding to forego the conventional treatment because of all the dire side effects and try to do what the new classes of immunotherapy drugs are doing, which is to boost our immune system so that they can heal the cancer naturally, but to do it without those drugs. So working with a team of medical specialists to incorporate traditional Asian medicinal techniques with completely up-to-date Western medical technology to monitor the progress. And what has occurred is that according to the MRIs that I received at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, which of course is one of the most renowned cancer research facilities in the world, and then subsequently at other facilities, it showed that the cancer tumor is gone. There's no clinical evidence of cancer.
Wow.
So I want to share this with people. I'm now starting my 5th year of radical remission. And of course, it's an ongoing process. It requires eternal vigilance and staying with the regimen. But and the regimen is, massive doses of natural herbal and mushroom supplements and, you know, uh, constant monitoring and energy work, meditation, Reiki, all of these kinds of things. Anti-cancer medicinal diet. My diet is primarily organic, vegan, and working on specific dietary regimens that have been shown clinically to be effective in working with cancer. So anyway, the book addresses that. It outlines my healing journey, specifically what I did, with the caveat that each person's journey is unique. You can't. Oh, we're frozen.
Oh, are we?
Are we
I
back?
can see
Are
you.
we back?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got you.
Okay, we're back.
Cool.
Yeah. So, well, I seem to be. I'm back. So, with the caveat that each person's cancer journey is unique, you can't do exactly what I did,
Right.
but then also giving some historical background to Buddhist medical traditions and incorporating all of that into one book. So, to finish up answering your question. I finished writing it. I'm getting ready to send it out to publishers, and hopefully they'll find it interesting enough to take. And then I'll be fulfilling what I see as one of the missions in the second half of my life, which is to help people realize their own innate healing potential and their own healing journeys and achieve their own remissions.
That's amazing. I'm looking forward to that one coming out.
Thanks.
Uh, for those who want to learn more about you online, I'll link your website and the book. Do you have anywhere else that you'd like to direct them?
The website would be perfect. The
Cool.
book is, again, I actually have one right here. It's Appalachian
Nice.
Zen. They could go to the publisher's website, Monkfish, excuse me, that cold is still receding. They could go to the publisher's website, but yeah, my website is a good starting point for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time today, and I highly recommend the book for anybody who's interested in Zen and your story. So, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jake. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for
Yeah.
inviting me. I had a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah,
Great
me too.
questions too. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.